Hey guys, it's Jennifer with Purple for Parents, Indiana. I am going to give you a crash course here on social emotional learning. All right, social emotional learning, or as you will also hear it referred as SEL, is the latest obsession of our education system. It seems very innocent to many people on the surface, but it is not. And it is actually very complicated and extremely deceptive. And it is important for parents to understand what is going on, parents and actually just everybody that is concerned about the education and indoctrination of our children. These programs are adopted by schools to educate the whole child and shift the school culture towards a new set of social norms. Students at SEL schools are evaluated and then psychologically manipulated to train them to accept a radical, politically correct value system through social justice lessons and counseling. It comes to us from CASEL, which stands for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. They define SEL as the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions, which is just all a very fancy, deceptive way of telling you that a government institution has decided that it should assume the role of a parent and teach children how to feel, what to think, and who to be, which is definitely not their job. CASEL's website tells us that the term social emotional learning was developed at the Fetzer Institute. Fetzer claims it is a spiritual foundation based on occult New Age teachings of people like Alice Bailey, who is the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. It is also backed by Bill Gates and the Rockefeller dynasty. All right, this video I want to play here comes directly from CASEL, as that it's an overview of what social emotional learning is. And listen as she describes why they feel it is necessary for the schools to adopt social emotional learning.
What do you really want for your children? You want them to be happy, healthy, able to relate to other people, have the ability to set goals and to make good decisions. If we don't teach them in school, a lot of children are not getting these most basic, most important, critical life skills.
Okay, so this is the mentality that you will find across the board of the supporters for social emotional learning. These people are being made to believe that our children belong to the community. And if the school does not give them what she just said, the essential life skills, then the children are not getting them, which for a lot of parents should be very offensive to even hear them say that, because just because I may teach my children one way and the house next door teaches them differently, that doesn't mean that the school needs to step in and override everything in the name of politically correct mindsets. But that's what they are doing. I'm going to fast forward this just a little bit and play another part for you here. Let's see.
To be able to relate to anyone. SEL is trying to bring a balance to the individual.
Let me see here. Skip.
Themselves.
It helps me have a happier brain and be more efficient.
Okay, this next part here, I would ask that you listen very closely for what they tell you about the role of a school is now and what they say about teaching actual academics to the children.
Only straightened out my life. I can't even pick where to begin. It just teaches you how just to be empathetic towards others and how to listen and I don't know how to care.
Do you want the government deciding what your children should be empathetic for and how they should feel about life? Something that makes our country amazing is that we are free to experience and mold our perception and our feelings and our values based on our own experiences, not what the school tells us.
It's really about developing those attitudes, skills, and knowledge that allows a student and an adult to achieve that approach to how they will work as a person.
We have the evidence. We know it works. We have the compelling argument that we need the whole child. I think it is our time to really capitalize on it.
We actually do
They need the whole child.
have evidence now. We did not have it 15 years ago. I mean, to be fair, we were in the R&D phase in the field of social and emotional learning. We're not in that phase anymore. Content is more and more of a commodity. Children own what they want now at very young ages. They will become self-directed. They can find out the dates of the Civil War without learning it from a teacher. So the question that they're bringing to school is, who am I? How do I work with you? How do we build a team? What is our purpose? Where do I fit? That nurture children to believe that it's worth learning.
Okay, so they just told you that they are shifting education away from academics because why would they need to do that when children can just Google when the war ended or who won the war? Now they have decided that children are coming to school to learn their purpose. Pretty scary stuff. And I will tell you, and I'm sure a lot of you agree, that my child is not government property, but they seem to think they are. Okay. Castle promotes many different social and emotional learning programs. If you go to their website, you will be able to pull out a whole list of programs, their names, and what they endorse as good social and emotional learning programs for schools. But the thing about them is that they all have the same goals, and they all use this framework and competencies or skills. All right, so they are now focusing on teaching children self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness. And this framework works from the inside out. So they bring in this SEL program and they incorporate it into the curriculum and instruction of the classrooms. It also takes over the school. A lot of if you go to the Castle website, it talks about how that these programs are a whole school transformation. So they push it then into the schools through their practices and policies. And then eventually Castle wants these programs to be pushed into our homes and communities. Right on their website, if you go for Castle, they say that SEL is a lever for equity. So equity is one of those buzzwords right now that you're seeing everywhere. And I think what's important about equity is to understand that equity is equal outcomes And that is not to be confused with equality, which is equal opportunity. Okay, so they are really pushing our children towards a mentality that argues for socialism and groupthink. And that is not what our country was. That's not how we were meant to run. Okay. So schools face some challenges in transforming the minds of strong-willed children who come from families that have rooted values and morals. So the Indiana Department of Education teamed up with Butler University to offer a neuroscience toolkit. It is full of training information for teachers and 100 days of lessons to use in the classrooms. The focus is change in thought process by mindfulness. And mindfulness is rooted in Hinduism and Buddhism, which should absolutely not be part of a public school, but somehow they are pushing it into the school anyways. So what they're doing is they're teaching these children how to clear their minds, become one with the moment. It's really just another technique of brainwashing to get them to clear their minds so that they are ready to accept whatever the school wants to push into them. This is a video that comes directly from the Educational Neuroscience Toolkit on the Indiana Department of Education. And it is for teachers to understand how they can, through these practices, rewire the brains of our children.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-traveled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep traveling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
Okay, so they are rewiring our children's brains using techniques like meditation and yoga. So, Science Toolkit, you will find a whole list of these lessons and practices that they're using in the classrooms. And it's basically if you have a traditional way of seeing and experiencing the world, the idea through the lessons is that you're using bad habits and that your brain will need to be rewired. Okay, social emotional learning programs depend on brainwashing techniques. So once they use their mindfulness practices to empty the minds of outdated ideology, they then must work on rewiring them. So what are they going to fill them with? They use propaganda everywhere, okay? So at my school where I worked, they used a program called Leader in Me. The Castle competencies were hidden in the language of the 7 habits that the kids were to achieve. The 7 habits encompassed the bulletin boards, the hallways, the projects, handouts, events at our school. Even our school apparel listed the language of the program. We even had to, as a school, make a new mission and vision statement based on the social emotional learning. The children and any guests at our school were bombarded with this propaganda. It's everywhere. They also use role playing. So at my school, they would have all of the kids belong to a Leader in Me class, and it was a mix of students from every grade. The teachers would provide different scenarios, often surrounding social justice conflicts, and they would discuss solutions based on what is socially and politically correct. Okay, now while they did not give us the answers to those scenarios, when you have a group of children who are, of course, kids are very, very kind and considerate of feelings, which is a good thing, but then they come up with these solutions on these scenarios, and it really is influencing these children based on a politically correct mindset. They use self-criticism and finger-pointing. Social emotional learning requires children to explore their personal roles in social disparities and why they think they are like that. So right now, what comes to mind is the idea of white fragility. You've probably heard that everywhere because the teachers union and basically everyone that's progressive is pushing this out. So if you're not sure what white fragility is, it means that if you are white, you are racist. It doesn't matter if you don't think you are, but because they believe that you were born racist if you're white. And if the schools have they push the idea that if someone comes to the school and says, I don't want my child to be involved in these lessons because we are not racist, and I don't think it's right for you to be telling my white child that they were born racist and that they're part of the problem. Well, then the idea is that whoever is saying that is just extra racist and you need more rewiring than others. They use isolation. Of course, that's part of the group think, right? If you're not part of the group, then the kids feel left out. And, it can be hard for adults to not be involved sometimes with the group. So imagine how easy it is to manipulate children to want to be part of the group. They use repetitive phrases and music. They use an us versus them technique, which requires the children to choose a side. And if you want to be accepted into that side or group, then you are accepted with complete conformity. They also use love bombing. At my school, the kids were praised and awarded based on the use of their habits, which of course would encourage other children to want to receive the same thing. Okay, so recently the Indiana Department of Education sent out a memo recommending schools use the social justice standards of the teaching tolerance framework from the Southern Poverty Law Center. The standards are aligned directly with SEL programs. These images are from the Teaching Tolerance website, and the lessons are exactly what you would expect. All right, so look, I don't mind if, someone next door is teaching their child differently than I am. That's fine. We live in America. We are free to do that. The problem is with these people pushing it to indoctrinate our children in the schools. These are some pictures from their website. This here is One World posters that the teachers can print out and display in their classrooms. There is no right way to love artwork and to be displayed in the classroom. We have the Black Lives Matter, which is not about Black Lives Matter. The Black Lives Matter movement is a Marxist attempted takeover of our country. Of course, the communist clenched fist, which always just drives me crazy that the teachers union wants to use that, but it's fitting because that's what they are pushing. So these social justice standards are directly aligned with social emotional learning competencies. So the Indiana Department of Education wants the schools to go there to get lessons. Okay, so this is a comic from the Teaching Tolerance link to a curriculum for white Americans to educate themselves on race and racism. The comic here has understanding whiteness, white privilege, a history of racial discrimination. And so what you would do if you were in the classroom, you would put this up on the projector. You would ask the students to discuss maybe as a whole class or group them together to have a discussion and then go around and allow them to share their ideas about what this means. Why is this a concise history of Black and white relations in the United States? And so the idea behind this comic is also the white fragility, meaning that all white people are racist. And it shows the white child pushing down the Black child saying, you know, this is for your own good. Let me up here. And he gets up there. And then the Black child says, you know, this is enough. I'm done. I'm getting up. And then the white child says, hey, I'm real sorry about being racist before. I know better now. And he says, okay, you know, can you give me a hand up? And then the white child says, of course not. That would be reverse racism. Look, if I got myself up here, why can't you? Okay, this is blatant indoctrination of our children. Last year, the Indiana Department of Education also sent out a memo to all the schools asking them to use the Welcoming Schools, which is a project from the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. It says right on here, this is another place, along with the Teaching Tolerance to get social emotional learning lessons. This is also a site that they are recommending the schools get their lessons from. And it says right on here that the Welcoming Schools lesson plans are here to help you make classrooms more welcoming, inclusive, and safe. You can find the LGBTQ and gender inclusive lesson plans that are aligned with Common Core standards and are easily integrated into social emotional learning and anti-bullying programs. Please do not let your local community or teachers tell you that the schools do not use Common Core. That's just, it's untrue. What they did was they took Common Core. They said, we're going to get rid of it. And everyone was excited because Indiana was going to lead the way away from this indoctrination. And all they did was continue with 90% of the Common Core standards, add some of their other stuff, and called it the state standards. So it's the same thing. Even when I was at the school, our textbooks and our resources would say Common Core aligned. They do use it. All right. So this Welcoming Schools so they want the schools to stop using pronouns and display sexual identity and orientation materials in the classroom, stop the use of pronouns, and make restrooms and locker rooms inclusive. So meaning that the children can choose based on whatever gender they want to identify with on what restroom they can use. One of the lessons that the Welcoming Schools offers is a definition sheet. And these are some of the genders and sexual orientations that the Welcoming Schools wants the teachers to go over with the kids starting in kindergarten. So they believe that at 5 years old, your kids should know what all of these terms mean. And of course, they are not teaching them as an idea that is or is not fact. They are teaching this as this is how it is, and you need to understand all of these terms. These are only a few of them. There is a lot of them that they want children to understand. Okay, so social emotional learning is not just about pushing this politically correct ideology through these lessons. They have the lessons, they have all the brainwashing techniques that they use just throughout the school, and then they also use data collection and progress monitoring. So SEL compiles a massive mental health data collection without parental consent. CASEL's website states SEL must be measured by assessment, and the data will inspire the practice. Schools collect data from schools by universal screening programs using surveys, questionnaires, interviews, and observations. So recently, there were a lot of parents that said, hey, I got a survey coming home. And there were parents that said, it didn't seem like that big of a deal. But believe me, it is all part of the agenda. They take all of the data that they collect through these surveys and questionnaires, and then they go through it and decide what plan they need for that area, that school. So the data is used to identify the social and emotional needs of each student. The school uses a multi-tiered system of support. They call on the website MTSS. Level 1, all students at a social emotional learning program are put in level 1, and that just means that they get the social emotional learning program. Level 2 is directed intervention of small groups or students that have been identified that need level 2 support. And then level 3 is for the children that they identify based on their criteria for targeted individual support and counseling. All right, so who's deciding how to, evaluate the data that they collect and what to do with it? Because they're not asking parents. So the Indiana Department of Education has on their website an implementation checklist for social emotional learning, and it requires a mental health community partnership to work alongside of the school to interpret the data and inform decision making. So listen to that again. Our schools are evaluating the children's mental health, sharing the data with community partners, and choosing interventions to influence the identified children. Who's behind this? Well, one thing we know is that social emotional learning programs are very expensive, and the Indiana Department of Education has some resources for schools so that they are able to use some of their title funding towards it. But another way they are getting money is through grants that are being offered by community partners. Social emotional learning programs are pyramid schemes, okay? And your children are the victims. In 2017, Eli Lilly Pharmaceutical Company approved 57 grants across Indiana. The grants ranged from $68,000 to $2.87 million. The schools who accepted this money agreed in return to collaborate with mental health care providers and implement a comprehensive counseling model developed by the American School Counselor Association, ASCA. The next obvious question is, who's behind ASCA? So here you go. This is Trish Hatch from Hatching Results and the American School Counselor Association. Trish was a U.S. Department of Education consultant under the Obama administration and author of Pilots, Passengers, Prisoners, and Hijackers, an educator's guide to handling difficult people while moving forward. ASCA's website makes no attempt at hiding the focus of the services that they provide, which emphasizes social justice ideology and political correctness. If you go to their site, this is just one example of a webinar series that they offer. And it says there, teachers must hold themselves accountable for dismantling racial oppression. Okay. This, along with the LGBTQ agenda and comprehensive sex education, is what's behind social emotional learning. They are pushing this ideology, this mindset onto your children. ASCA's series trains school counselors on how to incorporate the Black Lives Matter movement into our classrooms by understanding white supremacy and using restorative justice practices, which removes consequences for behaviors they attribute to social disparities. If you have a child coming home telling you that there's another child that is a constant behavior and disruption within the classroom, and you're wondering why they are not removed and, from the classroom until they can be in the classroom without affecting everyone's day and learning, it is because of restorative justice. They now believe that it is, that if a child is acting out, that, it's basically not because they're not responsible for the behaviors, society is. So we need to fix society and allow that child to continue because it's not their fault. So ASCA, I want to point out right up here in the corner, see how they've crossed out guidance and replaced it with school. ASCA also wants schools to discontinue the use of guidance counselor and use school counselor. The idea being guidance is for certain individuals, but school counselors work with everyone. Again, in the video in the very beginning, they say they need the whole child, and they don't mean some, they mean all of the children. Okay. Lastly, I want to end with the reason our education system is supporting this obvious indoctrination of our children. It is because they are heavily influenced, actually I would argue controlled, by a very powerful group that you're all familiar with. Unfortunately, it's the teachers union. Incredibly many of our own teachers are funding the demise of our youth and their future. If you have not, I would highly encourage you to read the NEA's Resolutions Handbook. But here is a couple of their resolutions. And specifically, here's the one on social emotional learning. They are fully behind this indoctrination because it aligns directly with their ideology. All right. The teachers union pushes a progressive, radical mentality. And so, of course, they're behind social emotional learning. And then I included on the end of this, the sex education, which we did not go over in these slides, but the new comprehensive sex ed that they're pushing into our schools, even here in Indiana, is a just incredibly offensive curriculum that was created by Planned Parenthood. It's sex education based on the idea that children are sexual from birth, and it starts in kindergarten. So social emotional learning, again, is the vehicle that the schools are using for this radical, progressive, politically correct mindset to manipulate them. So, all right, guys. That's it. So I hope this was very quick, and I hope it put some context to the social emotional learning. So they bring in these programs. The programs are a whole school transformation. They believe that, this is taking precedence over academics, that this is now their job. They believe that the parents can no longer parent, that they need to do it for you. And then what's really scary is they are using these surveys They are collecting mental health data without your consent. They are giving it to mental health partners to identify children that they need to change, the mindset, rewire their brains through practices like meditation and yoga, so they can come in with this new progressive ideology.